So we're starting here in line 728 with the word hic, which often in Latin means here, but in this context we might translate it as at this point, at this time. Then the subject is turnus in line 729. So turnus, and then the main verb emicat, springs forward. And then we have this slightly strange phrase, impune putans. Now putans is a participle, a present participle that means thinking. And then impune is an adverb which really means something like without punishment. It's where we get the English word impunity from. So literally thinking without punishment. So I think the meaning is something like thinking that he could strike without being punished for it later. So that's why I translated it in English as thinking it safe, i.e. thinking it was safe to attack. And, we have et here, he rises, consurgit, he rises alte, he rises high, that's another adverb. And in fact, I forgot to put in alte in the translation, so you should add the word high after rises in the English translation. He consurgit alte, he rises high. Corpore toto, this is ablative. Literally it means with his whole body. Perhaps in English we might say something like putting his whole body into it, or something like that. But literally it's an ablative phrase, with his whole body. And he rises high onto, that's in plus accusative, onto his ensem sublatum, his raised sword. So ensem is the accusative of ensis, meaning a sword, and sublatum is a PPP, agreeing with it. So it means having been raised. So he's rising onto his sword, i.e. he's sort of standing upright and leaning over the sword so that he can put his whole body's weight into the strike, into the blow that he's about to give to Aeneas. And then we have in line 730 this phrase et ferit, which means and he strikes. Okay, and then later on in the line, in 730, there's a new subject, which we can tell because there's a plural verb, exclamant, and the subject is Troes, first of all. So the Trojans cry out, exclamant Troes. And also another subject is trepidi Latini, which, and trepidus means something like on edge. It's a kind of combination of excitement and anxiety. So I translated it as the excited Latins. So that whole phrase means the Trojans and the excited Latins cry out. And then there's a new subject here, which is acies. Now the word acies normally means a battle line, and you could translate it that way here, but it can also mean eyes, like oculi. And that's probably the better way to translate it here. So the gaze, the eyes, amborum, of both, or of both sides, that's genitive plural, was riveted, arecti. And then we have to imagine a verb there like sunt, like arecti sunt. Now this word arecti, or arectus, this was used before of Turnus's ears, if you remember earlier in the text. It said that Turnus pricked up his ears. His aures were arecti. Here we have that same image of arectus, which means kind of upright or on end. But in this case, it's not literally the ears being pricked up. It's being used more metaphorically of the eyes. So that's why I said the gaze is riveted, right? Their eyes are fixed on what's happening. And then we have a bit of a contrast here, which is at, which is the word that means but. So but, the perfidus ensis. Now perfidus means treacherous. and ensis is a sword again. So the treacherous sword, and then frangitur is present passive. That means is broken. I think in my translation I said breaks, which is fine, but I think perhaps we want to be slightly more literal there. We can say is broken. And then in medio ictu, that means in the middle of the ictus, in the middle of the blow or the strike, the sword deseret, literally that means it deserts or abandons the ardentem. The object is ardentem, and ardentem means, it's a participle, it means the man who is literally burning, literally on fire, the man who is burning to attack. So I translated deseret as fails, right? The sword in the middle of the blow, in medio ictu, fails the eager man, ardentem, the eager person, the ardent person. And then we have a slightly tricky phrase here, which is ni. Now, ni is kind of short for nisi, so it literally means unless, and then fuga is the subject here, which means flight, right, running away, fleeing, and then sobeat means was helping or were helping, or was coming to his subsidium, to his aid. So the phrase means something like unless flight was coming to his aid. And here we have to imagine really the other half of this conditional sentence. So the idea is something like Turnus would be helpless unless flight were coming to his aid. Something like that. And then in the next sentence, Turnus is the subject, so fugit, he flees. Quicker, occior, quicker, swifter, faster than the east wind. So eurus is the east wind, euro is an ablative of comparison. So it means than the east wind. He flees faster than the east wind. And then ut here, this is ut plus indicative, aspects it. So therefore it means when, as or when. So he flees faster than the east wind when he aspects it, he observed, a capulum ignotum. That means the unfamiliar sword hilt. So a capulum is the hilt of a sword, right, the handle of a sword, the bit that you hold, and ignotus means unknown or unfamiliar. So when he observed the unfamiliar sword hilt and his inermem dextram. Now, inermis is an adjective that means unarmed, right, without weapons, and dextram means the right hand. So in other words, what's happened is his sword is broken, and so he sees, or the sword he's holding is broken, and he's suddenly realizing that the hilt, the handle of the sword he's holding, is unfamiliar. In other words, he picked up the wrong sword when he set out to fight. And he also sees that his right hand is now unarmed because the sword is broken. And the context of this is something which basically will become clear in the next few lines. So let's just go on a bit here. Fama est praecipitem. So then fama est means the story is, or the story goes. And then we're going to go into indirect speech. And so that's accusative and infinitive. So the accusative is praecipitem, and then the infinitive is going to be here in line 737, rapuisse. That's a perfect infinitive. That means to have snatched, to have taken. Okay, so the story is pharma est that he hurrying, right? So praecipitem means it's referring to Turnus. He in a hurry, the man in a hurry. Cum here means when. So when he was conscendebat, when he was mounting his junctos equos, his yoked horses. Junctos is a PPP, it means having been yoked. So when he was mounting his having been yoked horses, prima in proilia. Now, I've changed here the English translation. I think the best translation for this is to assume that prima and proilia are agreeing with each other. They're both neuter accusative plural after in. So I would translate that phrase prima in proilia as at the start of the battle. Literally into the first battles. But I would translate it as at the start of the battle. Okay, so the story is that praecipitem, in his hurry, when he was mounting cum conscendebat, his yoked horses, junctos equos, at the start of the battle, prima in proilia, and then in the second half of line 736, we have an ablative absolute. We have our ablative noun, mukrone, and then an adjective patrio agreeing with it, and then our ablative PPP is relicto. So the phrase literally means with his father's sword having been left behind. And we might translate this in various ways. You could say when he had left behind his father's sword, or having left behind his father's sword, or something like that. And then we go into line 737. Dum trepidat means while he was hurrying. The story goes that he rapuisse, this is our infinitive in indirect statement, that he grabbed or snatched the ferrum, the sword, of his charioteer Metiscus, aurigae metisci. So those are genitive. In other words, what's going on here is that Turnus was in such a rush to get to battle that he left behind his father's sword and accidentally took instead Metiscus's sword. And there's a reason why this is important, and that's because his father's sword, a sword which was made for him by the god Vulcan, okay, this sword is magic, basically. Right? It was made by a god, so it's extra hard, it's extra tough. The sword that Vulcan made for Daunus, the father of Turnus, is a kind of magic, really tough sword. And Turnus has left it at home. And instead of bringing that sword, he's brought a not very good sword. He's brought the sword of Metiscus. So that's the problem here. Okay, and then we go to line 738. Idque diu. So idque means and that thing. So que means and id means that thing, or that sword. It's neuter because it's referring back to ferrum. So, and that sword, this is Metiscus's sword, suffecit, that means was enough, was sufficient, or sufficed, diu, for a long time. So, and that sword sufficed for a long time, it was enough for a long time, while, that's dum, or as long as, the Teucrians were giving their wandering backs. So the adjective palantia is describing the backs, the terga. But really, it's referring, so grammatically, the adjective is referring to the backs. But in terms of the meaning, it's really talking about the Teucrians, who are the Trojans. So I would probably translate palantia as if it were agreeing with Teucri. So that's why I translated it. While the straggling Teucrians, palantia Teucri, were turning their backs, in other words, were fleeing. So Virgil is saying that the rubbish sword, right, the sword of Metiscus, that's not very good, that was fine so long as Turnus was just fighting straggling Trojans, not very good Trojans who were just kind of wandering around aimlessly. Of course, it wasn't enough later because Turnus has to fight the great Aeneas. That's the point. And then we go to postquam in line 739. And there's a contrast here, right? Before it was okay, but afterwards, right? So there's no word in the Latin that means but I still put it in my translation. So but after, postquam, but after, ventum est, that literally means after there was a coming, but you could say after it came to, so here we have ad vulcania arma. So literally the Latin says after there was a coming to the Vulcanian weapons of a god. Right, so literally arma and vulcania are agreeing together, and then dei is the genitive. But really, I think, so again, that's the grammar, but the meaning, I think, is that dei and vulcania really go together. So the idea is, the sword didn't work when it had to face the arms, the weapons of the god Vulcan. That's really the idea. So I translated it here as after it came to the weapons of a god, ad arma dei, the ones of Vulcan, to Vulcan's ones. So Vulcania, I tried to keep in my translation Vulcania agreeing with arma. But you don't have to do that. You could say after it came to the weapons of the god Vulcan. And then the subject here is mortalis mucro. Now I think I translated mortalis as mortal, so as the mortal sword, but we could be even more specific here, and I've changed that in my translation. I've said the mortal made sword. The sword made by a mortal. In other words, Virgil is contrasting the weapons that a god has made, like the sword that Vulcan made, with a mortalis mucro, a sword that a mortal man has made. So the mortal sword, or the mortal made sword. Now, keu here, C-E-U, is a word that means like. So it's like glacies futilis. Now, futilis means brittle, something that snaps easily. And then glacies is ice. So like brittle ice, keu futilis glacies, the mortal sword dissiluit, it flew apart. In other words, it shattered. And then ictu here means at the blow, i.e. when it was hit. And in fact, ictu, I missed out the translation. So you should add the phrase at the blow after flew apart. So it flew apart at the blow. And then we have fulva resplendent fragmina harena. So the fragments, the fragmina, resplendent, they glitter or shine on the yellow sand. So fulva harena is ablative, on the yellow sand. Fulva means yellow, harena means sand. That's where we get the English word arena from. And then we go to line 742. Ergo, so, or therefore. Frantic Turnus, Amen's Turnus, he's the subject here. He seeks, petet, diversa aequora, literally different or far away plains. But we could say different parts of the plain. Fuga, in flight or with flight, that's ablative, with running away. And, that's et, now, huk means to here, so literally now to here, then to here. In other words, this way and that. Now hither, now thither, now here, now over there. He implicat incertos orbis. Orbis is actually accusative plural, right? It should be, in prose, it would be orbes. So he implicat, he literally entangles or weaves together, incertos, wavering or unsteady, and then orbes are circles. In other words, he's kind of weaving around in circles and doesn't really know where to go. And then enim explains why he doesn't know where to go. For, that's enim. Undique, on all sides. Teucri, the Trojans, have inclusere. They have shut him in. Right? In prose, this verb would be incluserunt. And in fact, you should perhaps change the translation to say have shut him in a crowded ring, in a densa corona. A corona literally is a crown, and so therefore it's like a round shape. So they've shut him in with a dense ring, it's ablative, with a dense ring, and, atque, from here, hinc, an empty marsh, vasta palus. So vasta means empty, palus means a marsh. From here, from another place, hinc, the steep walls, ardua moinia. Moinia are walls, ardua means steep. And then kingunt means hem him in, shut him in. So the point is, he has nowhere to go. The Trojans have kind of trapped him in a circle. He doesn't really know how to break through their ranks. And also, there aren't many directions that he could go. Because over here, there's a kind of marshland that he can't really run through, because it's all marshy. But on the other side, the other way that he could go, there are the steep walls of the city that he can't get into. So he's frantically looking around, he's trying to find a way to escape, and he can't.